Welcome back to Dr. Harmony, the place where we peel back the sterile white curtains of the medical world to reveal the raw, beating heart of human morality. Today's story is a testament to the fact that while some people wear pristine white coats, their souls are stained with greed, and while others might be overlooked because of the color of their skin, their integrity shines brighter than any surgical light. This is a journey of betrayal, systemic corruption, and a twist of fate that proves karma never misses an appointment. If you believe that a life is worth more than a bank balance, then you need to hear this account of what happened when I decided to defy the most powerful man in the hospital. Stay with us until the very end, because the way the tables turned will leave you breathless. Let's dive into the corridors of Hopewell General, where I learned that the cost of saving a life was my own career. The smell of antiseptic usually calms me, but tonight it felt like it was choking me. I have been a doctor for 15 years, a veteran of the ER and the surgical suite, and I have always believed that the Hippocratic Oath wasn't just a suggestion. It was a mandate. My skin is dark, a deep mahogany that has often made me a target of subtle sneers in these hallowed, ivory towers of medicine. But my heart is as pure as the light I try to bring to my patients. I am Dr. Elias Thorne, and for a decade, I have served under the shadow of Dr. Alistair Sterling. Sterling is a man who looks exactly like what the board of directors wants. 50 years old, silver-haired, pale-skinned, and possessing a smile that looks expensive but feels ice-cold. He isn't a healer, he is an accountant with a scalpel. To him, patients are not people. They are insurance claims, billing cycles, and risk assessments. We had clashed before, usually over minor things like bedside manner or the allocation of resources, but I never imagined that our professional friction would turn into a life-or-death battlefield. It was a rainy Tuesday, around 2 a.m., when the swinging doors of the emergency wing burst open, bringing with them the scent of wet asphalt and the metallic tang of blood. The paramedics were shouting, their voices echoing off the linoleum walls. On the gurney was a young man, barely 20, his face pale and covered in lacerations, his chest barely moving. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding, blood pressure is bottoming out, the lead paramedic yelled. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward, my gloved hands already reaching for the patient's pulse. He was slipping away. I could see the light fading from his eyes, that terrifying transition from a living soul to a hollow vessel. Get him to trauma room 1. Cross-match 4 units of O negative and call the surgical team now, I commanded. My team moved with the practiced rhythm of a well-oiled machine, but as we began to stabilize him, a shadow fell over the room. It was Sterling. He didn't come in with a stethoscope. He came in with a clipboard. He looked at the boy on the table with the same detached curiosity one might show a broken piece of furniture. Hold on, Elias, Sterling said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. Who is this? Was there an intake form? Has his insurance been verified? I looked at him, my eyes wide with disbelief. He's a Jane Doe, or a John Doe in this case. No ID, no wallet, likely a hit and run. He's dying, Alistair. We don't have time for a credit check. Sterling stepped closer, his presence blocking the path of the nurse who was bringing in the IV fluids. This hospital is struggling with its margins. We cannot afford another charity case taking up a surgical suite and 3 weeks of ICU recovery that we will never be reimbursed for. If he can't pay, or if there is no one to guarantee the debt, he stays in the stabilization bay. Do not take him to surgery. The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic, frantic beeping of the heart monitor. The boy's heart was failing, because a man in a $3,000 suit decided his life didn't meet the profit threshold. I felt a heat rising in my chest, a fire that had been smoldering for years. You're joking, I whispered. You're telling me to let him die because he doesn't have a wallet on him. Sterling narrowed his eyes, his pale face hardening. "I am telling you to follow protocol, Dr. Thorne. This is a business. If you want to play hero, go join a non-profit in the jungle. Here, we follow the rules of the board. Now, step away from the table." I looked down at the boy. His hand, cold and limp, brushed against mine. At that moment, I didn't see a case. I saw a son, a brother, a human being who deserved a tomorrow. I looked back at Sterling, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the need to be polite. I didn't feel the need to protect my position. "How much?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Sterling paused. "What? How much is the deposit for the emergency surgery and the first 48 hours of care? What is the number that satisfies your cold, dead heart?" Sterling let out a dry, mocking laugh. "The standard deposit for an uninsured emergency admission is $50,000. But don't be ridiculous, Elias. You don't have that kind of money to throw away on a ghost." Without a word, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my personal credit card, the one I had saved for my daughter's university tuition, the one that represented every extra shift and sleepless night. I threw it onto the patient's chest. "Run it!" I barked at the head nurse, who was staring at me in shock. "Run the card for the full 50,000. I am the guarantor. Now, get this boy to the OR before I sue this hospital for every penny it's worth for medical malpractice by omission." Sterling's face turned a deep, ugly shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "You are making a massive mistake, Thorne," he hissed, stepping so close I could smell his expensive coffee breath. "You are bypassing my direct order. You are disrespecting my authority in front of this entire staff. If you do this, if you use your own funds to bypass hospital policy, you are finished here. I will see to it that you never practice medicine in this state again." I didn't even look at him as I began pushing the gurney myself. "Then I guess I'll have a lot of free time," I replied. "But this boy is going to live." We burst through the doors toward the surgical wing, leaving the great Dr. Sterling standing in the hallway, fuming in his pristine, empty world. I knew I had just signed the death warrant for my career, but as I looked at the boy's pale face, I knew it was the only choice I could live with. The doors to the operating room slammed shut behind us, cutting off the sight of Sterling's trembling rage. But the silence of the hallway was replaced by the chaotic symphony of the OR, the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator, the clattering of stainless steel instruments, and the frantic commands of the surgical nurses. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not just from the adrenaline of the surgery, but from the realization of what I had just done. $50,000. That was my life savings. That was the safety net for my family, my daughter's future, the result of years of grinding through double shifts and holiday rotations. And yet, as I scrubbed my hands, the hot water scalding my skin, I felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't a cog in a corporate machine. I was a doctor. "Scalpel," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. The young man on the table was a map of internal destruction. The impact of the vehicle had ruptured his spleen and caused a massive tear in his hepatic artery. He was bleeding out from the inside, his life force pooling in his abdominal cavity. Every second was a gamble. "Suction! I can't see the bleeder!" The monitors began to scream. A flatline was imminent. "He's coding, Dr. Thorne!" the anesthesiologist yelled. "Start compressions." I didn't stop. I reached inside the cavity, my fingers searching through the warmth and the slickness of blood for the source of the leak. It was a blind search, a desperate prayer in the form of a surgical maneuver. Then I felt it. The pulsing jet of the artery. I clamped it. "I have the bleeder. Give me 2 more units, fast." For 4 hours, time ceased to exist. The world outside, Sterling, my job, my bank account, vanished. There was only the needle, the thread, the pulse, and the breath. By the time the sun began to peek through the high, frosted windows of the hospital, the boy's vitals had stabilized. His heart was beating with a slow, stubborn rhythm. He was alive. I stepped away from the table, my scrubs soaked in sweat and blood, feeling a heaviness in my limbs that felt like lead. I walked out of the OR and found Sterling waiting for me in the recovery lounge. He wasn't alone. 2 security guards stood behind him, and the hospital's HR director, a woman named Sarah, who always looked like she was sucking on a lemon, stood to his left. Sterling didn't ask about the patient. He didn't ask if the surgery was a success. He looked at his watch. 5 hours, Thorne. 5 hours of hospital resources, electricity, and staff time wasted on a whim. I looked him dead in the eye. He's stable. He's going to make it. Sterling let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Oh, he'll make it? Good for him. But you won't. You violated a direct administrative order. You used your personal funds to coerce staff into performing an unauthorized procedure. You have created a liability nightmare for this institution. He stepped forward, handing me a manila envelope. Your employment at Hopewell General is terminated, effective immediately. Your access badge has been deactivated. These gentlemen will escort you to your locker to retrieve your personal items, and then they will escort you to the parking lot. I looked at the envelope, then at the security guards. I felt a sting of betrayal, not because of the job. I knew this was coming, but because of the coldness of it all. I had worked here for 10 years. I had saved thousands of lives in these halls. I had been the one people called when a case was too difficult for anyone else. And now, I was being treated like a common thief. You're making a mistake, Alistair, I said quietly. Not because of me, but because of what you've turned this place into. A hospital shouldn't be a fortress for the rich, it should be a sanctuary for the sick. Sterling leaned in, his voice a low hiss. The world is a business, Elias. It's time you grew up and realized that people like you, people who think with their hearts instead of their heads, are a liability. Now, get out before I have you forcibly removed. The walk to my locker was the longest walk of my life. I felt the eyes of my colleagues on me, nurses I had shared coffee with, residents I had mentored. Some looked away in shame. Others looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. They knew that if it could happen to me, it could happen to any of them. I packed my stethoscope, a few medical journals, and a framed photo of my daughter into a small cardboard box. As the security guards led me toward the exit, I took one last look at the ICU doors. The boy was in there. He was breathing because of me. That thought was the only thing that kept my head high as I walked out into the cold morning air. The next 30 days were a descent into a private purgatory. Being fired for insubordination is a death sentence in the medical community. Word travels fast. Every time I applied for a position at another clinic or hospital, the door was slammed in my face before I could even sit down for an interview. Sterling had followed through on his threat. He had blackballed me. My phone stopped ringing. My friends from the hospital stopped returning my texts. I sat in my small apartment, watching my bank balance dwindle to nothing, wondering how I was going to tell my daughter that the money for her school was gone, and that her father was a disgraced doctor who couldn't even get a job at a walk-in clinic. I felt like a ghost. I had spent my life helping others find their way back from the brink of death, and now I was the one who was drowning. I began to doubt myself. Was Sterling right? Was I just an arrogant fool who let his ego get in the way of common sense? I had saved one life, but in doing so, had I ruined my own? I spent my days walking in the park, trying to find some sense of purpose in the silence. It was on the 30th day, exactly 1 month since that fateful night, that a black sedan pulled up to the curb as I was walking home. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He didn't look like a process server or a lawyer. He looked like power personified. "Dr. Elias Thorne?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I have a message for you. You are requested at the corporate offices of the Wayland Consolidated Group. There is a car waiting." I recognized the name. Wayland Consolidated owned Hopewell General. They owned half the hospitals in the tri-state area. I assumed this was the final blow, the legal team coming to sue me for the liability Sterling had mentioned. I got into the car, prepared for the worst. The ride in the back of the black sedan was silent, the city blurring past the tinted windows like a smear of gray and neon. My mind was racing, constructing a dozen different scenarios, none of them good. I imagined a room full of lawyers in sharp suits, ready to strip me of my medical license or demand I pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages for the unauthorized surgery. I gripped my knees, my knuckles turning white. I had nothing left to give them. They had already taken my career, my reputation, and my savings. What else was there? The car pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, the headquarters of the Wayland Consolidated Group. This was where the real decisions were made, far away from the blood and screams of the emergency room. I was led through a marble lobby that felt more like a cathedral than an office building. The receptionist didn't ask for my ID. She simply nodded and gestured toward a private elevator. "Floor 50, Dr. Thorne. They are expecting you." The elevator ride was so smooth I didn't even feel the movement, only the slight pressure in my ears as I ascended. When the doors opened, I wasn't met by a legal team. I was met by a vast, sun-drenched office with a panoramic view of the harbor. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man I had only seen in newspapers and on the news. This was Arthur Wayland, the chairman and CEO of the entire conglomerate. He was a man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He didn't look like a man who spent his time dealing with HR disputes. "Sit down, Elias," he said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. He didn't use my title, but he didn't sound disrespectful either. I sat in the leather chair across from him, feeling small in the vastness of the room. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here. I've spent the last week reading your file, not just your file from Hopewell, but your entire history. Top of your class, 15 years of surgical experience, 0 malpractice suits, and a record of patient outcomes that is, frankly, statistically improbable." He leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "And then I see a report from one Dr. Alistair Sterling, claiming that you are a rogue element, a financial liability, and a man who lacks the professional discipline to work in a modern medical environment. He says you were fired for gross insubordination and the theft of hospital resources." I took a deep breath, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. "I didn't steal anything, Mr. Wayland. I used my own money to cover the costs because Dr. Sterling refused to treat a dying man without a deposit. I made a choice between a life and a balance sheet. I chose the life. If that makes me a liability, then I accept that." Wayland didn't blink. He just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute. $50,000, he said quietly. "That was your entire life savings, wasn't it? To save a stranger who had no name, no ID, and no promise of repayment. Why?" I looked out at the horizon. "Because that's what a doctor does. If we start putting a price tag on a heartbeat, we aren't healers anymore. We're just merchants. I didn't spend half my life studying medicine to watch a 20-year-old die because he forgot his wallet." Wayland stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city. "Sterling is a very efficient manager. He brings in high profits. He keeps the board happy, but he has a blind spot. He thinks that a hospital is a factory that produces money. He forgot that the product is human life." Wayland turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "The young man you saved, his name is Julian. He's 21 years old. He's a bit of a rebel. Likes to drive his motorcycle too fast, and he had a habit of leaving his wallet at home because he didn't want to be tracked by the system. Very idealistic, very foolish. My heart skipped a beat. You know him? Wayland's face softened for the first time, a flicker of raw emotion crossing his eyes. He is my grandson, Elias. My only grandson. The room seemed to tilt. I felt the air leave my lungs. The John Doe on the table, the boy I had gambled my entire future on, was the heir to the very empire that owned the hospital. I was out of the country when the accident happened, Wayland continued, walking back to his desk. My daughter, Julian's mother, was frantic. By the time I got back and heard the full story, Julian was already in recovery. But I started asking questions. I wanted to know who saved him. And that's when I found out that the man who saved my grandson's life had been fired, blackballed, and humiliated by the very man I put in charge of that hospital. He picked up a pen and began tapping it against the desk. Sterling told me he was cleaning up the trash. He didn't realize that the man he called trash was the only one with the soul to save his boss's legacy. I couldn't speak. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. If I had listened to Sterling, Julian Wayland would be dead. Sterling would have technically been following protocol, and the Wayland family would have lost their son. I've spent the last month doing an internal audit of Hopewell General, Wayland said, his voice turning cold again. But this time the coldness wasn't directed at me. The things I found, the cost-cutting measures Sterling implemented at the expense of patient care, the secret bonuses he was taking for hitting profit targets by denying treatments. It's a cancer, Elias. And when there's a cancer in an organization, you don't just treat it. You cut it out. He pushed a folder across the desk toward me. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a contract. I'm not just firing Alistair Sterling, Wayland said. I'm stripping him of his medical license for ethics violations and suing him for the recovery of every cent he misappropriated. But that leaves a vacancy. Hopewell General needs a new leader. It needs someone who understands that the heart of a hospital is the people, not the profits. It needs someone who isn't afraid to risk everything for what is right. I looked at the contract. The title at the top read, Executive Director and Chief of Medicine. You want me to be the director? I whispered. Wayland nodded. I want you to go back there, Elias. I want you to walk back into that hospital, not as a disgraced surgeon, but as the man who owns the keys. I want you to rebuild it in your image, and don't worry about your $50,000. It's been returned to your account with a significant amount of interest as a personal thank you from my family. I sat in the back of the car on the way back to Hopewell General, the contract clutched in my hand like a shield. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief, vindication, and a simmering righteous anger. For 30 days I had lived in the shadows of shame, and now I was being asked to step into the brightest light possible. But this wasn't just about a title or a bigger paycheck. It was about the soul of medicine. As we pulled into the familiar driveway of the hospital, I saw the grand fountain and the glass-fronted lobby that I had walked out of with a cardboard box just weeks ago. The security guards at the gate, the same ones who had escorted me out, did a double-take as the black corporate sedan pulled into the reserved executive parking bay. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my tie. I wasn't wearing my scrubs today. I was wearing a sharp charcoal suit that Arthur Wayland's assistant had arranged for me. I felt different. The weight of the world was still on my shoulders, but it no longer felt like it was crushing me. It felt like it was fueling me. I walked through the main doors, and the atmosphere in the lobby shifted instantly. The receptionist, who had avoided eye contact with me a month ago, now stood up, her jaw dropping. "Dr. Thorne," she stammered. I didn't stop. I walked straight toward the executive elevators, the ones that required a high-level security clearance. I pulled out the new gold-coated badge Arthur had given me and swiped it. The light turned green with a soft, melodic chime. The top floor of Hopewell General was a world away from the chaos of the ER. It was quiet, carpeted, and smelled of expensive wax and success. This was Alistair Sterling's kingdom. As I walked down the hallway toward the director's office, I saw his personal secretary, a woman named Linda who had worked for the hospital for 20 years and had seen more than her fair share of Sterling's cruelty. She looked up from her desk, her eyes widening behind her spectacles. "Elias, what are you doing here? You know you're not allowed on the premises. If Alistair sees you, he'll call the police." I gave her a small, sad smile. "It's okay, Linda. I'm here for a meeting. Is he in?" She nodded slowly, her hand hovering over the intercom, as if she were about to sound an alarm. "He's in a budget meeting with the department heads. You can't go in there." I didn't listen. I walked past her desk and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. The scene inside was exactly what I expected. A dozen department heads, men and women I had worked alongside for years, were sitting around a long table, looking exhausted and demoralized. At the head of the table sat Alistair Sterling, looking smug as he pointed a laser at a spreadsheet projected on the wall. "And if we reduce the nursing staff on the night shift by another 10%, Sterling was saying, his voice dripping with greed, "we can increase the quarterly dividend by—" He stopped mid-sentence as the doors swung shut behind me. The room went deathly silent. Every head turned. Sterling's face went from pale to a mottled, angry purple in 3 seconds. He dropped his laser pointer and stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "Thorne? What the hell is the meaning of this? I told the security team that if you ever set foot on this property again, you were to be arrested for trespassing." He looked at the department heads, his eyes flashing with malice. "Did one of you let him in? Is this some kind of pathetic protest?" No one spoke. They looked between me and Sterling, confusion and a glimmer of hope dancing in their eyes. I walked to the foot of the table, placing the folder from Arthur Wayland directly on the polished wood. "The security guards didn't let me in, Alistair," I said, my voice calm and low. "The board of directors did." Sterling laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "The board? I speak for the board. I am the director of this hospital, and you are a terminated employee with a black mark on your record that will never wash off. Now, leave before I have you dragged out in handcuffs." I didn't move. I looked around the room at my former colleagues. Dr. Aris from pediatrics, Dr. Chen from oncology, head nurse Miller. They looked like they were holding their breath. "Alistair," I said, "I think you should check your email, or perhaps look at the document I just put in front of you." Sterling sneered, reaching out with a trembling hand to flip open the folder. As his eyes scanned the first page, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His hands began to shake, the paper rattling in his grip. This is a mistake," he whispered. "This isn't possible." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. How did you? "The Wayland Group. Why would they?" "Because the boy you tried to let die was Julian Wayland," I interrupted. "The grandson of the man who signs your paychecks, or rather, the man who used to sign your paychecks." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. I saw Nurse Miller's hand go to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Dr. Aris leaned forward, a look of pure shock on his face. Sterling looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He looked down at the document again, his voice cracking. It says I'm being terminated for cause. Ethics violations? Misappropriation of funds?" I stepped closer, my presence filling the room. "It says a lot more than that, Alistair. It says that effective 5 minutes ago, you are no longer the director of Hopewell General. You are no longer a doctor at this institution. And it says that the board has appointed a successor." I looked around the room, making eye contact with every person there. "My name is Dr. Elias Thorne, and As of this moment, I am the executive director of this hospital." The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp went up, followed by a stunned, nervous murmur. Sterling looked like he wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He was a man who had built his entire life on power and intimidation, and in a single heartbeat, he was powerless. I walked around the table, approaching him at the head. "I believe you're in my chair, Alistair, and I believe you have 10 minutes to clear out your office before security arrives to escort you from the building, and this time, they won't be polite." Alistair Sterling stood frozen, his hand still clutching the edge of the mahogany table, as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling into an abyss. The room felt different now. The air, once thick with his oppression, felt suddenly charged with an electric sense of justice. He looked around the table, searching for an ally, a friendly face, someone to tell him this was a joke. But he found only cold stares and the weary, judgmental eyes of the people he had spent years belittling. The department heads, once terrified of his shadow, now sat up a little straighter. The silence wasn't one of fear anymore. It was one of anticipation. "You can't do this," Sterling finally managed to choke out, his voice thin and cracking like dry parchment. "I built the profit margins of this hospital from the ground up. I saved this place from bankruptcy." I stepped closer, my shadow falling over his desk. "You didn't save this hospital, Alistair. You harvested it. You cut the life out of it to make the numbers look better on a spreadsheet. You turned a place of healing into a chop shop for the elite." I leaned down, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "The board didn't just fire you. They've authorized a full forensic audit of every cost-cutting measure you ever signed. If there's blood on those pages, they'll find it. Now, move." With a jerky, uncoordinated movement, Sterling gathered his tablet and his expensive leather portfolio. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He tried to maintain some shred of dignity as he walked toward the door, but his legs seemed heavy. As he reached the exit, he turned back, a final flash of bitterness in his pale eyes. "You think you're better than me, Thorne? You think you can run this place on heart and morality? You'll be begging for my spreadsheets in 6 months when the budget collapses. You're a surgeon, not a CEO. You're out of your league." I didn't blink. "I'd rather fail with integrity than succeed with your soul. Goodbye, Alistair." The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment the boardroom remained silent. Then, slowly, Dr. Aris from Pediatrics began to clap. Then Dr. Chen joined in. Within seconds, the room was filled with a standing ovation, not for a title, but for the return of a man they respected. I felt a lump in my throat, but I raised my hands to quiet them. We didn't have time for a celebration. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But we have work to do. This hospital has been headed in the wrong direction for too long. Today we change course. I want a full report from every department on the equipment you've been denied, the staff you've lost, and the patients who were turned away because of their insurance status. We are going to find them, and we are going to make it right." As the meeting broke up and the doctors rushed out to spread the news to their departments, I walked toward the director's office. My office. The heavy doors were open. Linda, the secretary, was already standing there with a box. She was smiling, tears glinting behind her glasses. "I've already started clearing his things, Dr. Thorne. I've been waiting for this day for a long time." I thanked her and stepped inside. The room was cold, decorated in shades of gray and glass, a reflection of the man who had just left. I walked over to the desk and saw a small framed photo Sterling had left behind. It wasn't of a family. It was a photo of him shaking hands with a politician at a golf course. I placed it face down on the desk. I sat in the chair, the leather creaking under my weight. It was the same chair Sterling had sat in when he told me my career was over. The irony wasn't lost on me. But my mind wasn't on the office or the power. It was on Julian Wayland. I needed to see him. I needed to see the life that had cost me everything and then given me back more than I could have ever imagined. I left the executive suite and headed down to the ICU. The atmosphere in the hospital was already changing. The grapevine in a hospital is faster than any fiber optic network. Nurses were whispering in the hallways, pointing at me, some offering small, shy smiles as I passed. The word was out. The outcast was back, and he was in charge. I reached the ICU and approached the glass window of Julian's room. He was awake. He was pale and hooked up to several monitors, but his eyes were bright and alert. A woman was sitting by his bed, holding his hand. She looked up as I approached the door. I recognized her from the photos in Arthur Wayland's office. It was his daughter, Julian's mother. I knocked softly and entered. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice trembling. She stood up and walked toward me, her eyes searching mine. "My father told me what you did. He told me that you gave up everything to make sure my son stayed on that table." I looked at Julian, who was watching us with a curious expression. "I just did my job, ma'am," I replied. She shook her head, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. "No, you did more than your job. You were his guardian angel when the system wanted to let him go. How do you thank someone for the life of their child?" She reached out and hugged me, a tight, desperate embrace of pure gratitude. Over her shoulder, I saw Julian give me a weak, shaky thumbs up. "Thanks, Doc," he rasped, his voice still raw from the intubation tube. "I hear I'm pretty expensive." I laughed, a genuine, warm sound that felt like it was healing my own soul. "You have no idea, Julian, but you're worth every penny." As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of completion. The $50,000, the firing, the month of being a pariah. It was all worth it for that one moment. But as I turned the corner toward the elevators, I saw a familiar face waiting for me. It was Sarah, the HR director who had helped Sterling fire me. She looked terrified. "Dr. Thorne, Elias, I was just following orders," she stammered, clutching a stack of files to her chest. I looked at her, and for a moment I felt a flash of the anger I had carried for a month. But then I remembered what Arthur Wayland said. You don't just treat the cancer, you cut it out. And Sarah had been one of Sterling's most loyal instruments. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I'm sure you were, but in this hospital, following orders is no longer an excuse for ignoring ethics. I'd like your resignation on my desk by the end of the day. And tell the legal department I want to see the ND as Sterling forced the staff to sign. We're tearing them all up." She nodded, her face white, and scurried away. I realized then that being the director wasn't just about making the big decisions. It was about the small ones, too. It was about cleaning the house so that the people who actually cared about patients could do their jobs without fear. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my daughter. "Dad," I heard. "Is it true? Are you really back?" I smiled, typing back a reply as I stepped into the elevator. "Better than back, honey. We're just getting started." The first week as director was a whirlwind of discovery, most of it darker than I had ever anticipated. While the staff celebrated the change in leadership, I was buried under a mountain of digital and paper trails that Alistair Sterling had tried and failed to scrub clean. My office, once a cold monument to corporate greed, had become a war room. I spent my nights fueled by bitter coffee and a burning need for the truth. It wasn't just about the money I had paid for Julian Wayland. It was about a systemic pattern of medical filtration that Sterling had perfected. He had been running a scheme that felt more like an insurance scam than hospital management. He would intentionally delay surgeries for patients with lower-tier insurance, wait for their conditions to become critical, and then bill for emergency interventions which yielded higher profit margins. It was a gamble with human lives, and he had been winning for years. But as I dug deeper into the family outreach files, a department Sterling had created under the guise of philanthropy, I found something even more disturbing. It appeared that Sterling wasn't just a greedy administrator. He was a gatekeeper for a network of wealthy families who used Hopewell General as their private playground. There were records of donations tied directly to organ transplant priority and experimental drug trials. Among those names, one kept reappearing: the Sterling Family Trust. It turned out Alistair had been funneling hospital resources into a private clinic owned by his own brother, a man who had lost his medical license years ago for illegal prescriptions. This wasn't just corporate mismanagement. It was a family-run fraud operation, hidden within the walls of a public-facing institution. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my tired eyes. The betrayal felt personal. I had worked under this man for a decade, believing that even if he was cold, he was at least competent. Instead, I had been working for a criminal. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Arthur Wayland. He looked older today, the weight of his grandson's near-death experience still visible in the lines around his mouth. He walked in and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Elias," he remarked, noting the stacks of files on my desk. "Worse, Arthur," I replied, turning the monitor toward him. "I've seen the ledger of a man who sold his soul. Sterling wasn't just cutting costs. He was running a shadow operation. He was using your hospital to launder medical services for his family's private interests." Wayland leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the documents. I watched his jaw tighten. "I suspected there was rot," Wayland whispered. "But I didn't realize it reached the foundation. My grandson almost died because of a man I trusted to protect this city's health. I want him ruined, Elias. Not just fired, I want him behind bars." I nodded slowly. "We're getting there. But there's something else. Sterling isn't going away quietly. He's been seen meeting with the head of the medical board. He's trying to claim that my appointment is a conflict of interest because I bought my way in with that $50,000 payment." Wayland let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Let him try. He's fighting a tidal wave with a spoon. But you need to be careful. A man like Alistair, when cornered, doesn't just bite. He tries to take everyone down with him. He knows where the bodies are buried, because he's the one who dug the graves." As Wayland spoke, my desk phone rang. It was the security desk downstairs. "Dr. Thorne, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent and related to the Sterling audit. She says her name is Elena Sterling." I looked at Arthur, my heart skipping a beat. "Sterling's wife?" I asked the guard. "No, sir. She says she's his daughter." I looked at Arthur, who gave me a silent nod. "Send her up," I said. 10 minutes later, a woman in her late 20s walked into the office. She had Alistair's sharp features, but none of his arrogance. Her eyes were red, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She carried a small USB drive in her hand like it was a live grenade. "Dr. Thorne," she began, her voice trembling. "I know who you are. I know what my father did to you, and I know what he's doing now." She sat down, her hands shaking as she placed the drive on the desk. "My father is a monster. He didn't just hurt patients. He's been using our family name to cover up a decade of fraud. He told me I was inheriting a legacy, but all I've inherited is a mountain of lies." She explained that she had been working in the hospital's accounting department under an assumed name, trying to understand where the charity money was actually going. She had discovered that the $50,000 I had paid for Julian Wayland hadn't gone to the hospital's general fund. It had been diverted into a private account, controlled by Alistair, within hours of my termination. "He didn't just fire you because you disobeyed him," Elena said, a tear falling down her cheek. "He fired you because he saw an opportunity to steal your life savings and blame it on administrative fees. He thought you'd be too disgraced to ever check." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just about policy. It was a personal theft, a calculated move to strip me of everything I owned while he laughed from his ivory tower. Elena looked at Arthur and then back at me. On that drive is the proof. Every diverted payment, every fake invoice, and the real reason he didn't want Julian Wayland to be treated. It wasn't about the money. He knew who Julian was. He wanted Julian to die so he could use the tragedy to push for a complete private takeover of the hospital group, citing management failure under the current board. The room went deathly silent. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was a conspiracy that touched on attempted murder. Sterling hadn't been ignoring a patient. He had been waiting for a victim. The air in the office felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. I looked at the small silver USB drive sitting on my desk, then at Elena Sterling. Her confession had transformed a story of corporate greed into something far more sinister. This wasn't just about a doctor with a cold heart. It was about a man who had been playing a high-stakes game of chess with human lives as his pawns. Arthur Wayland stood up, his face a mask of controlled fury. He walked over to the desk, his eyes locked on the drive. "He knew?" Arthur asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He knew that boy was my grandson, and he deliberately tried to delay his care." Elena nodded, wiping her eyes with a shaking hand. "My father has been obsessed with taking control of the Wayland Consolidated Medical Division for years. He felt that the current board was too sentimental, too focused on community outreach. He had a consortium of private investors lined up to buy the hospital at a devalued price. If the chairman's grandson died on the watch of a poorly managed ER, he could have argued that the current leadership was incompetent. He was going to use Julian's death as the final nail in the coffin for your leadership, Mr. Wayland." I felt a wave of nausea. I had seen some dark things in my 15 years of medicine: neglect, accidents, the cruelty of disease, but I had never encountered a human being who could look at a dying 21-year-old and see nothing but a business opportunity. I plugged the drive into my computer, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The files were meticulously organized. Elena had been thorough. There were recorded phone calls, encrypted emails, and a series of strategic memos that outlined the planned takeover. One email, sent just an hour before I performed the surgery on Julian, was addressed to a private equity firm. It read, "The catalyst is on the table. Expect a leadership vacuum by morning. Prepare the offer." The coldness of those words was bone-chilling. Sterling hadn't just been a bad doctor. He was a predator. He had been waiting for a tragedy, and when fate delivered Julian Wayland to his doorstep, he tried to ensure that tragedy was finalized. "Elias," Arthur said, his voice snapping me back to the present. "Call the district attorney. Now. I don't want this handled internally. I want Alistair Sterling in a cell by nightfall." I reached for the phone, but before I could dial, the intercom buzzed. It was Linda, my secretary, and she sounded panicked. "Dr. Thorne, you need to turn on the news. Channel 4. Now." I grabbed the remote and flicked on the wall-mounted television. The screen showed a crowded press conference. Standing at a podium, looking every bit the victimized professional, was Alistair Sterling. He was flanked by a high-powered legal team, and to my horror, the president of the state medical board. "I have served Hopewell General with honor for over a decade," Sterling was saying into a cluster of microphones, his voice cracking with a perfectly practiced tremor of emotion. "And yet, I was summarily dismissed and replaced by a man who quite literally bought his position. Dr. Elias Thorne used a $50,000 bribe, which he calls a deposit, to circumvent hospital protocol and secure a favor from the Wayland family. This is the definition of pay-to-play medicine. It is a danger to the public, and it is a corruption of everything we stand for. I am filing a $50 million lawsuit for wrongful termination and character assassination, and I am calling for the immediate suspension of Dr. Thorne's medical license. The audacity of the man was breathtaking. He was taking the very act of mercy that had saved a life and twisting it into a criminal act of bribery. He was using the legal system as a smokescreen to cover his exit. He's good, Arthur whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen. He's turning the narrative. By the time the truth comes out in court, the hospital's reputation will be in tatters, and he'll have moved on to his next scheme. I stood up, a calm, cold clarity washing over me. No, he won't. He thinks he's playing a game of words, but we have the data. He thinks I'm just a doctor he can bully. But he forgot that I'm the one who actually knows how to heal this place. I looked at Elena. Are you willing to testify? If you do this, your family name will be dragged through the mud. You'll be the daughter who took down her own father. Elena stood up, her jaw set in a line of determination that reminded me of her father's, but with a soul behind it. My father destroyed our name a long time ago, Dr. Thorne. I'm just the one who's going to stop him from destroying anyone else. I turned to Arthur. We don't wait for the district attorney to build a case. We take this to the press, right now. We hold a counter-press conference in the hospital lobby right in front of the people who actually work here. We show them the emails. We show them the diverted funds. We show the world exactly who Alistair Sterling is. Arthur smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. I like the way you think, Elias. I'll have my PR team and the Wayland legal department there in 20 minutes. Let's see how Alistair likes it when the catalyst talks back. As Arthur began making calls, I walked over to the window. Down below in the parking lot, I could see the news vans starting to gather. The battle for the heart of Hopewell General was no longer happening in the shadows. It was out in the open. I felt a pang of anxiety for my daughter, for my reputation, for the stability of the hospital. But then I remembered the feeling of Julian's pulse coming back under my fingers in the OR. I remembered the look on his mother's face. I put on my white coat, the same one I had worn the night I was fired. It was clean now, but in my mind it still carried the weight of that night. I checked my reflection. My skin was dark, my heart was ready, and my conscience was clear. Linda, I said into the intercom, gather all the department heads in the lobby and call the security team. Tell them that if Alistair Sterling tries to set foot on this property to collect his things, he is to be detained immediately. We're going to give the public the real story. I walked out of the office, Elena and Arthur following behind me. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I knew that the next hour would either save my career or end it forever. But for the first time in a month, I wasn't afraid. I was a doctor, and I was about to perform the most important surgery of my life. I was going to cut the corruption out of my hospital, once and for all. The elevator doors opened to a sea of flashing lights and a wall of noise. The lobby of Hopewell General was packed, not just with journalists and camera crews, but with nurses in blue scrubs, janitors with their carts, and patients who had climbed out of their beds to witness the showdown. At the center of the room stood Alistair Sterling, his legal team forming a protective barrier around him. He had anticipated my arrival. He looked at me with a smirk that said he had already won the public relations war. He didn't know about the USB drive in my pocket. He didn't know his own daughter was standing right behind me. "Dr. Thorne!" a reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone toward my face. "How do you respond to the allegations of bribery? Did you pay $50,000 to jump the line for a VIP patient?" I stepped up to the makeshift podium, the hospital's logo gleaming behind me. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked directly at Alistair. "I didn't pay a bribe," I said, my voice amplified by the speakers until it shook the glass walls. "I paid a ransom. I paid $50,000 to save a 21-year-old boy because the man standing over there, Dr. Alistair Sterling, refused to let a surgical team touch a dying patient without a credit card authorization." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sterling stepped forward, his face reddening. "That is a lie. It was about hospital protocol and resource management. You bypassed the board." I didn't let him finish. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and held it up. "This drive contains the protocol Dr. Sterling is so fond of. It contains evidence that the money I paid was immediately diverted into a private offshore account. It contains emails proving that Dr. Sterling knew exactly who the patient was, Julian Wayland, and that he deliberately delayed treatment to create a crisis for the Wayland family." I paused, letting the weight of the accusation sink in. He didn't want to save a life. He wanted to use a death to facilitate a hostile takeover of this hospital. The cameras pivoted to Sterling. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, panicked calculation. "You have no proof of that," he hissed, though his voice lacked its usual venom. "That's a desperate fabrication from a man trying to save his stolen job." That's when Arthur Wayland stepped forward, his presence commanding instant silence. "I am the proof, Alistair. And I'm not alone." Arthur gestured to the side, and Elena Sterling stepped into the light. The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. Sterling recoiled, as if he had been physically struck. "Elena?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing? Get away from them!" Elena didn't move. She stood her ground, her voice clear and filled with a painful strength. "I'm doing what you never did, Father. I'm telling the truth. I was the one who tracked the funds. I was the one who saw the redacted files in the family trust. You didn't just betray this hospital. You betrayed us. You used our name to mask a criminal enterprise." She turned to the reporters. "My father didn't just ignore a patient. He sought to profit from a tragedy he helped engineer. I have provided the digital trail to the district attorney's office and the FBI. The chaos that followed was absolute. Sterling's lawyers tried to pull him away, but the crowd of hospital staff blocked their exit. These were the people he had spent years underpaying, overworking, and threatening. They weren't moving. For the first time, the great Alistair Sterling looked small. He looked like a cornered animal. Suddenly, the lobby doors burst open. But it wasn't more press. It was the police. 3 officers in uniform, led by a detective in a trench coat, marched through the crowd. "Alistair Sterling," the detective called out. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, the lobby erupted. Not in cheers, but in a strange, heavy silence. We all watched as the man who had ruled this hospital with an iron fist was led out in shame. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes full of a hatred so pure it was chilling. But I didn't feel any triumph. I only felt a deep, exhausted sadness for what this place had become under his watch. I turned back to the microphone. The reporters were screaming questions, but I raised my hand for silence. "Today isn't about Alistair Sterling," I said, looking at the nurses and doctors in the crowd. "It's about the fact that from this moment on, the doors of Hopewell General are open to everyone, regardless of what is in their wallet. We are doctors, not bankers. Our skin colors, our backgrounds, and our bank accounts don't define us. Our actions do." I looked at the camera, thinking of my daughter at home. The cost of a life should never be measured in dollars. It should be measured in the effort we give to save it. I stepped down from the podium, my legs finally feeling the fatigue of the last month. Arthur Wayland put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Elias. You saved more than just Julian tonight. You saved the soul of this city's medicine." But as I walked back toward the elevators, I knew the battle wasn't entirely over. The hospital was in financial disarray, the public's trust was shattered, and I was now the man responsible. The weeks following Alistair Sterling's arrest were a blur of reconstruction. The headlines had transitioned from the scandal of the pay-to-play doctor to the miracle at Hopewell. but behind the scenes the work was anything but miraculous. It was gritty, exhausting, and meticulous. As the new director, I didn't spend my time in the mahogany row office. I spent it in the trenches. I moved my desk to a smaller office near the ER intake, wanting to be where the heartbeat of the hospital was loudest. I needed the staff to see that their leader wasn't a shadow behind a closed door, but a colleague who breathed the same antiseptic air they did. The financial mess Sterling left behind was a labyrinth of deceit. He had hollowed out the pension funds of the nursing staff and diverted maintenance budgets into his private shell companies. Elevators were breaking down, surgical lights were flickering, and the pharmacy was running low on essential medications because of unpaid administrative debts. I sat down with Arthur Wayland and the board, presenting a radical recovery plan. "We don't need more marble in the lobby," I told them, slamming a thick report onto the table. "We need a new MRI wing, a 24-hour free clinic on the west side, and we need to hire back every nurse Sterling fired for budgetary reasons. We rebuild the trust by rebuilding the care." Arthur looked at me, a faint smile on his face. "It's going to cost a fortune, Elias. The shareholders are already skittish after the fraud news." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then, we tell the shareholders that if they want a return on their investment, they have to invest in people. A dead patient doesn't pay a bill, Arthur, but a healthy community builds a legacy." To his credit, Arthur didn't flinch. He used his personal influence to stabilize the stock. And for the first time in years, the Wayland Consolidated Group started acting like a healthcare provider instead of a hedge fund. But the hardest part wasn't the money, it was the people. One afternoon I walked into the staff break room. The silence that fell was heavy with a decade of suppressed fear. I saw Nurse Miller, the veteran who had watched me get fired, sitting in the corner. She looked at me with a mixture of respect and lingering trauma. I sat down next to her. "I'm not him, Miller," I said softly. "You don't have to look at the floor when I walk in." She looked up, her eyes watery. "It's just hard to believe the change is real, Dr. Thorne. We've spent so long being told that our compassion was a weakness. Sterling used to say that if we spent 5 minutes too long talking to a patient, we were stealing time from the hospital." I took her hand. "Compassion is the only currency that matters here now. If you need 10 minutes to hold a patient's hand, you take it. That's an order." Slowly, the culture began to shift. The family outreach department was dismantled and replaced with a genuine charity care oversight committee, led by none other than Elena Sterling. She had stayed on, determined to scrub the stain of her father's name from the hospital's history. She worked harder than anyone, navigating the legal complexities of returning the funds her father had stolen. One evening, as I was finishing a double shift, because I refused to stop practicing medicine just because I had a title, I stopped by Julian Wayland's room. He was sitting up, his color back, arguing with a nurse about when he could get his motorcycle back. He saw me and grinned. "Hey, Doc, my grandpa says you're the boss now. Does that mean you can sign my discharge papers?" I laughed, checking his charts. "Not yet, Julian. You've still got some healing to do, but you're getting there." He looked at me, his expression turning serious for a moment. "You know, I don't remember much from that night. Just the rain and then the cold. But I remember your voice. You sounded angry, like you were fighting for me." I nodded. "I was, and I'd do it again." As I left his room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. My bank account was back to where it should be. My reputation was restored, and my daughter was proud of me. But there was still one ghost left to face. I received a letter from the state penitentiary. Alistair Sterling wanted to see me. He was awaiting trial and had refused to speak to anyone except the man who stole his chair. My first instinct was to tear the letter up, but I knew that to truly move forward, I had to close the book on the man who had tried to bury me. The prison was a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the hospital. I sat behind a glass partition, waiting. When Sterling was let in, I almost didn't recognize him. He was no longer wearing his designer suits. He was in a drab orange jumpsuit. His silver hair was unkempt, and the arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, flickering rage. He picked up the phone, and I did the same. "You must feel very smug, Thorne," he spat, his voice raspy. "The hero of the hour, the savior of the poor. You think you've won, don't you?" I looked at him, and to my surprise, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. "I didn't come here to gloat, Alistair. I came here to ask why. You had everything. You were a brilliant surgeon once. You had a family that loved you. Why did you trade it all for numbers on a screen?" Sterling laughed, a dry hacking sound. "Because the numbers are the only thing that's real. People die, Elias. People forget. But power is the only thing that lasts. I just played the game. You got lucky because you saved the right boy. If it had been anyone else, you'd still be a nobody in a cardboard box." "That's where you're wrong," I replied quietly. "It didn't matter who he was. That's what you never understood. To me, he was everyone, and that's why you lost." I hung up the phone and walked away, leaving him screaming into the glass. I walked out into the sunlight, breathing in the fresh air. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. The first anniversary of the night that changed everything arrived with a quiet dignity. Hopewell General was no longer the cold corporate fortress it once was. The lobby was now filled with local art, comfortable seating, and a bustling community health desk. As I walked through the halls, I didn't see the fearful glances of subordinates. I saw the focused, proud faces of healers. We had turned the hospital from a place of profit into a place of purpose. My daughter was there that morning, volunteering at the new pediatric wing we had opened in honor of the John Does of the city, those who often go unseen but deserve the best care we can offer. I held a small ceremony in the garden to unveil a simple plaque. It didn't have my name on it, nor Arthur Whalen's. It simply read, "To those who heal with their hearts, and to the lives that are worth more than gold." Arthur stood beside me, his grandson Julian by his side. Julian was fully recovered, now working for a non-profit that provided transportation for emergency medical cases. Seeing him healthy and giving back was the greatest interest my $50,000 could have ever earned. "You did it, Elias," Arthur whispered as the small crowd applauded. "You proved that the system can have a soul." That evening I sat in my office one last time before heading home. I looked at my hands, the hands that had saved a life and held a pen to change 1,000 more. I realized that my skin color, which Alistair Sterling thought was a mark of a nobody, had become a symbol of resilience and integrity in this building. I had walked out of here with nothing but a cardboard box, and I had returned to lead an empire. But the title of director wasn't the prize. The prize was the silence of a heartbeat that kept on thumping, the tears of a mother who didn't have to say goodbye, and the knowledge that I never broke my promise to myself. As I turned off the lights, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road had been paved with betrayal and deception, but it led to a destination of truth. Medicine is a hard master, and the world can be a cold place, but as long as there are people willing to risk everything for a stranger, there is hope. I locked the door, nodded to the night shift security guard, who smiled and called me by my name, and walked out into the cool evening air, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring.
Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey of Dr. Elias Thorne. It's a powerful reminder that doing the right thing is never a mistake, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed this story of justice and medical drama, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Don't forget to like and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma always finds its way home. See you in the next story here on Dr. Harmony.